I'm gonna be so real with you guys. I never expected to be here. I don't really know how we got here, but I'm also not surprised because I kind of feel like I was always destined to get to this point. But it's been a very wild ride. It's a crazy time over here. So we're just gonna roll with it. This is the series that has haunted me probably the longest. I have had my eyes on it since it was published, since I was starting out on BookTube. People have been talking about it for like a decade now, and every single time I've seen somebody bring it up, I've been like, I need to read that. I need to know what the people are talking about. But I'll be honest, I was scared. I was terrified. I was daunted by the task that was set in front of me. And it's the kind of series that I would pick up the first book and I would get 2 pages into it, and then I'd put it down and say, nah, I can't actually read that. And so for a very long time, I had just assumed that I was never gonna read it, and I was perfectly okay with that, and I didn't feel like I needed to read it. And then time passed, and a lot of things happened, and I changed as a person. I ended up on Tumblr the other day, and one of the people that I follow was like gushing about it, and she was like, I don't necessarily condone this series, but also like it's very fascinating, and it feels very Andrew and Neil coded. And if you know me, I love Andrew and Neil. I love All for the Game. And that I think is part of why I've been drawn to this series for so long, is that they're kind of like a pair. If you talk about All for the Game, you're probably going to talk about Captive Prince. They're really not that related at all, but they kind of came out around the same time, and they both started out as indie pubs. And so like I've been watching and I've been waiting, and I finally was like, fuck it, I think I'm mature enough now. I think I can do this. And now we're here. We're talking about Captive Prince by C.S. Pacat. I know you're wondering what year it is. We're talking about it in 2024 because who fucking cares? I read it for the first time last week. If you've never heard of Captive Prince, good for you. I've only been hearing about it for a decade now, and it has a very big reputation. This book has been called problematic, toxic, controversial. And I think I've seen people throw trauma porn around. It's a scary read. I was terrified to pick it up, and I thought it was gonna be one thing, and it turns out that's actually not what it is. It's actually very different than what people will lead you to believe. So before I like get into gushing about it and talking about it for like 3 hours, I do wanna touch on the controversial aspect of it. And I do kind of wanna I wanna defend it a little bit. I wanna defend it. Just a smidge. This is the story of 2 princes, and one of the princes is gifted to the other prince as a sex slave. That's probably all you know, actually. That's really all that I knew. I was like, cool, sex slavery. I, someone who is famously aro ace and sex repulsed, definitely should be reading this mature series. Originally it was slash fiction. It's fantasy, there's no magic, but it's a lot of like military stuff. And that was about all I knew. And that's probably about all you knew. Obviously, the reason why it is so controversial is that it is mature. There is mature content in here. And like mostly that just means there's a lot of like explicit sexual content, but the reason why people are so upset by it is because it does have slavery, and sex slavery means there's sexual assault. The first book especially focuses a lot on the main character Damon, as he is gifted to this prince, Laurent, and I'm definitely butchering his name. It's supposed to be French, but it's fine, just roll with it. Damon is gifted to Laurent, and they're from rival countries. And so Laurent kind of hates Damon, and Damon hates Laurent, and they are like tied together through slavery. And that's how the story begins. And so when we go to Laurent's country, which I believe is called Ver or Veer, I don't know which one. When we go to Veer, essentially, we are witnessing this culture that is very steeped in sex and sexual violence and slavery. And so it's very uncomfortable. It's more uncomfortable because we are seeing it from Damon's perspective, who he is used to slavery, but not in the way that this country does it. And he is a prince who is being forced to be a slave, and so he gets very dehumanized very quickly. The beginning is a lot, and C.S. Pacat does not hold back on details. Like, it is graphic, it is violent, like, it's just like any other fantasy. If you've read high fantasy, like, high fantasy is just a very graphic, explicit, mature genre. And I don't know if people kind of forget that, or if they're hypercritical of this because it is pitched as a romance, or because they start out as enemies and slave master and then become romantically involved. I don't know. I'm not really sure how this series is so controversial, because it's really not that different from any of the high fantasy that I've read in my time. But that is why I avoided it for so long, and that's why a lot of people yell about it. It's just a kind of series that I think people automatically are like, this is bad, we should not be supporting this, we shouldn't be supporting slavery or sexual assault or any of these things. And I can totally understand if you are uncomfortable reading this series because sexual assault is triggering for you, whether you've had a sexual assault experience or not. Like, it is hard to read. The only reason I was capable of reading it at this point in my life is that, like, I have matured a lot. I've read a lot of books. I've experienced a lot of things in my time. And some might say I've been training for this moment. I've gotten better about reading explicit sexual content and violent content and all of these things just because I've been exposed to a lot of different books over the last 10 years. And so if I had read this 10 years ago, or God forbid 15 years ago, like, yeah, it would be scarring. I would not be able to read it because it's a lot. But I know myself and I'm mature, and also I can think about things critically. And so I pushed through, and it honestly was not as bad as I was expecting it to be. It was uncomfortable. I'm not gonna lie. It was difficult at the beginning. But I think people market this series as like a bad series and a toxic, problematic series. And the truth of the matter is, like, nobody is glorifying the bad things that happen. Like, it is the kind of thing that by the end of the series, like, we're working to end slavery. Like, that is the whole point, to overcome all of that trauma and to try and fix their countries and to get rid of all of that bad shit that's happening. Ultimately, the point of the series is like all the good things, you know, like forgiveness and love and trust and overcoming trauma and like all of this stuff. And quite frankly, the most bad shit that happens is in the first book. Once you get past book one, like, yes, there's violence, yes, there's explicit sexual content, but there is a lot of consent that I wasn't expecting, and there is a lot less violence than I was expecting. And so I don't understand why people are so vicious about this series, because if you sit with it, if you're a mature adult, and if you're able to handle the mature themes, like, by book two, everything is different. Like, book two is a completely different book than book one. And when I finished book one, I was like, you know, like, that was pretty good, and I can see the potential for it, and I really like the main characters. So, like, I'll read book two and see where it takes me. And by, like, a couple chapters into book two, I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the holy grail. I found the thing. I found the next hyperfixation. Why don't people talk about this? Because it's so fucking good. I don't know if you've read the series, if I've convinced you to look into the series again. I do want to gush about it. I do want to talk about some spoilery things. So if you don't think you're going to read this series, feel free to stick around. We can chat about it. You can see why I'm so obsessed with it. But if you have any idea that you might be interested and you don't want to be spoiled, like, this is the time. You can do it. I will be holding your hand. If somebody who famously hates sex and thinks sex is really gross, can get through it, like, I think you can do it. I think you can do it, but also, like, tread lightly. It is very heavy. Let's talk about it. Let's get in the weeds. Let's gush. I don't even know where to start with this series, because, like, it was one of those experiences where I was in the middle of reading it, and at the end of the first book, I was like, okay, this is, like, really good. I think I'll keep going. I really like the main characters. I think it has a lot of potential. Like, we'll see where it goes. And by second book, I was like, I would die for this series. I will reread this series every day for the rest of my life, and it won't be enough. And the feelings just overtook me in a way that I was not expecting. And I shouldn't be surprised, because it is quite literally exactly my shit in a lot of ways. But there are so few instances in life now where I'm reading a book series and I'm like, oh, this is rewiring my brain chemistry, and these characters mean a lot to me, and this will be a part of me for the rest of my life, you know? Like, I read a lot of good books. I read 5-star reads, whatever, but it's like, this one grabbed me by the throat and would not let me go. And I literally, like, I read every single book in a day. Like, first book, second book, third book, the short stories. And after 4 days, I was like, staring at the wall. And I think I just am so impressed by the main pairing. Like, Damon and Laurent are such an incredible pair. And I think what's so good about it is that, like, this is true enemies to lovers. Like, I think we've watered down the trope of enemies to lovers over the last couple of years because so many people use it in relation to, like, contemporary romance. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know? Like, if you guys hate each other at the office, like, sure, that's enemies to lovers. We'll take it. It's fine. But, like, there's a big difference between, like, oh my God, like, he's my coworker and he's so annoying, I hate him, and, like, this man killed my brother and I am now his master, but I love him and I want the world for him. Like, everybody calm down. This is the motherfucking blueprint. Like, we gotta sit with that, you know? And I think what's so great about mature series is that, like, in writing adult themes and adult content, like, you just get this richness of, like, the gray area, you know? Like, not everything is black and white. But when you have these kinds of intense dynamics that are so murky that it's like, yeah, like, objectively, this probably is not a healthy relationship. It's not a healthy world. Like, it's all problematic and controversial. Like, the gray area makes everything so much richer at the end. I just think if this series had been watered down at all, like, it wouldn't have the same impact, because at the end of the day, I do believe this series is about consent, which is ironic because it starts out with slavery. But I think, like, the way that C.S. Pacat wrote it is just so genius, because you spend the first, like, half of the series being like, how are these two people going to balance out their power, you know? Because even though, like, Damon starts out as the slave and Laurent is the master, it's important to understand that, like, Damon did kill his brother, so, like, he had power and he has power over Laurent for that. And then Laurent whips him, and so it's like, you're spending the whole first half of the series trying to justify the relationship and be like, okay, is this so unhealthy that they shouldn't be together? But also, they learn how to forgive and how to trust each other, even though each of them has hurt the other in really dark ways. And, like, that's what the characters are grappling with the whole time. I was so compelled by the ending of the second book, where Laurent and Damon make love, and Damon spends the whole time being like, he doesn't know that I killed his brother. He doesn't know who I am. Like, I am actively hurting him, and this is bad, and we're not going to be able to stay together once he finds out, and, like, everything is terrible. And then you find out that Laurent knew the whole time, and somehow that's better and worse. Watching them work through all of this, and having their own motives and trying to understand, like, what is more important? Is it more important to, like, fall in love with this person that I have learned to trust, who has been good to me in the time that I've known them personally? Or, like, do I need to, like, be strong for my kingdom, for my country, because I am a king? Like, how do we balance out, like, duty and love? And, like, that's just, like, honestly, that's just, like, one of the core basic things of fantasy that is just so fascinating to read, because, like, most of us are not going to have to deal with that in our lifetime. But, like, the tagline, the quote, like, a kingdom or this, is so powerful and so insane. And even more so when you have the added layers of, like, you hurt me deeply, but I trust you, and you have proven that you care about me and care for me even after you hurt me. And I think what's so powerful too in this series is the redemption concept and quality, and, like, learning how to trust somebody who has devastated you. And so, like, watching the two of them bridge the gap and tread those waters and kind of, like, figure out how to move on from intense loss like that is just, like, it's beautiful. It's stunning. It's fantastic. And I think, like, I was expecting this series where, like, they exerted all this violence against each other the whole time. And it's like, after the initial violence of, like, okay, Damon killed Laurent's brother, and in retaliation, essentially, Laurent whipped Damon. And it's like, cool. The scales were balanced at the beginning. Like, they were working through it all throughout the series, but, like, they had balanced the scales. And at the end, we have the full circle moment of Laurent killing Damon's brother. And instead of it being, like, the scale tipper, it's like, oh, now we are exactly even. Like, we are both brother killers, and that's fine. And we can move on now and accept that. They spend most of the middle part of the series just, like, learning how how to trust the other person, how to let somebody else in, how to heal from all of the bad things that have been done to them. And it's so beautiful. I love it. I love it so much. And I love them both as characters. Like, I think Daemon is super compelling because his growth throughout the series is like, he started out as this prince, this noble prince with slaves. And in becoming a slave himself, like, he takes up this banner of like, I'm going to end slavery in my country. Like, once I become king, we're not going to do this shit anymore. I'm sick of it. Like, and part of that is because he had to go through all of that to like realize that. But I do think even from the beginning, he was uncomfortable with it. Like, even when we get to that scene where, probably, I would argue, one of the most uncomfortable scenes in the series, when Daemon is first brought to the ring and he is watching these guys assault each other, essentially, and then he's forced to go into the ring, and at the end of all of it, he is given the option to rape a child, essentially, and he immediately cuts that shit out, and he's like, I will not be doing that. Like, he has the guts and like the goodness inside of him. It's just like working through that throughout the course of the series takes a little bit of a time. Laurent is an interesting character because you start off the series being like, this guy is evil, he is insane, he is cold and frigid, and like, he is the problem. And it's like, no, actually, he's not even the problem either, because he doesn't, like, he is fighting against slavery in his own way, and like, he is really, aside from whipping Daemon and forcing somebody to give him a blowjob, like, objectively, like, Laurent really doesn't hurt Daemon that much at the beginning. And like, as their alliance shifts and changes over the course of the second book, especially, like, they're evenly matched. They're evenly matched, and I think both of them protect each other in ways that they never expected. For a series that is so like toxic and unhealthy, like, I do think like Daemon and Laurent actually have one of the healthiest like relationships that I've read about in a very long time, because like by the middle of book 2, Daemon understands Laurent in a way that most people don't, that he's like, okay, like, this guy needs his alone time and he needs people to like get off his back, and I need to tell him these things up front because he wants to know them. And like, Laurent just like takes his advice very easily. He's like, yep, that's rational and correct, and I will do exactly what you told me to do because it makes sense and it's good for me. I think one of the most interesting parts of the series, though, is watching the breakdown at the beginning of King's Rising, because it's essentially a third act breakup. And it's just the third act at the beginning of the third book. They have this like horrible breakup scene that just like was devastating to read, I might add. And Laurent was like, I knew the whole time, asshole. And Daemon is like, but it meant something to you. We made love and it meant something to you, and you knew who I was the whole time. And so when they're in their divorce era, it's so compelling because like Laurent essentially is like, I will still interact with you. Like, we need this alliance. Like, I will be a bitch to you, but like, I'll be professional about it. And Daemon spends the whole time being like, does he miss me? Does he think about me? Like the scene where Laurent is drunk and he does tell Daemon that he misses him. And then at the end of the scene, the little like nugget of information where Laurent is like, yes, uncle, and I wanted to walk into traffic. I just love the dichotomy of ending that chapter with him being like, yes, uncle, like confirming that like the regent has assaulted him at some point. But Daemon does not think about it or comment on it. The next chapter is just him being like, man, that guy missed me. Like, he loves me. I just love that Daemon is like such a himbo. Like, he's so smart, but he's so stupid. He's just a big jock who's like, this guy loves me, and that's great. The other thing that's so funny to me about King's Rising is like, for no reason whatsoever, C.S. Pacat was like, hey, I know we're in the divorce era right now, but what if we had a quick game tourney? And also we made it sexual, question mark. A lot of people focus on how dark this series is, but what surprised me the most is that it's actually like, it's just a silly time. Like, everybody is so funny at all times. The scene where Daemon and Laurent are trying to like make their way through the South, and they claim to be Charles the Merchant, and then they meet up with Charles the Merchant, and they're just like, I'm Charles, and he's Charles, and our grandfather is named Charles, and everybody is like, okay, I guess that makes sense. And then I also really want to talk about the short story collection, because when I was starting the series, I didn't know that I would get to the end of it, let alone that I would be interested in reading the short stories. But reading the short stories was the most fun I've had in a very long time. I think they're so great because they're just like fun. They're just joyful. There are like a couple moments in Ansel's story that are like a little bit off-putting, but like overall it's just like rom-com vibes of like, haha, we're in love, you know? Obviously, The Summer Palace, fantastic short story. It was the perfect epilogue. Their relationship sends me every single time because somehow they are like hopelessly romantic and cute and sweet. And then you cut to a scene where they're going in the bath and Laurent is like, you attended me, now I need to serve you. And it's like, Jesus, is that you? That whole scene, I was like, this is so sexual, but it's also just like the most romantic thing I've ever seen, that he's like, you were a slave to me and now I get to be your slave for a moment. And they just like let it happen because that's how it needs to be to balance everything out. Like, anyway, I'm normal. But what I really wanted to talk about is the Charles short story, because it's the funniest one. It's just the best bit, that like Laurent and Damon like gallivant through the South and nobody knows who they are, but also like they do. Like all of the scenes with Layman where Charles is like, this poor boy is so in love with the prince and they're so sweet together, but like the prince is in love with somebody else. This poor boy, he needs to find another guy. And Damon is just like, don't worry, Charles, like I'm gonna be okay. I'll love him as long as he'll have me. And Charles is like, okay, if you think so. And then you cut to the end and he introduces him and it's just so silly. And I just like, I think I'm just so upset that the internet led me to believe that this series was going to like break my heart because it's so terrible. And in actuality, it is just like a breath of fresh air. Like it's just sunshine and daisies and like a little bit of sexual assault, but mostly sunshine and daisies. I cannot tell you how much I would like to reread this series, and I just read it. It's a problem. In conclusion, I actually don't have anything really concrete to say about this series. It's fun. It's dark. It's well plotted. I think the other thing that shocked me is how smart the plot is, and also like it's actually a series about military strategy and politics. Like I got so focused on the slavery that I had no idea it's actually just like a military fantasy novel. And it talks a lot about being a king and managing a country and like overcoming the fucking regent who is a piece of garbage. I don't know. It was just like, it was so good. I didn't expect it to be so good. And people have complained about the writing and complained about the voice and like all of this stuff. And I just don't see it. And I don't know if that means I'm stupid or if I'm smarter and better than everybody. And I think we should conclude that. Like, I'm just better than everybody because I love this series. I don't actually think everybody should read this series, but like, if you like All for the Game, you should read it. And I think depending on who you are as a person, like it could actually be the thing that changes your life. So anyway, I'm gonna end this by letting you know that I did actually make a playlist. I sat down and I made one today because I could not stop thinking about them. And it's really good. A couple of the songs that I put on the playlist that I'm particularly proud of. Slutty by the Scarlet Opera. It actually really has nothing to do with the series, but also it needs to be on there. Number 2, Unholy by Sam Smith, definitely needs to be on that playlist. And number 3, there is a song that I found in my searching for songs for this playlist. And it is the most perfect song for this series. And I had never heard it before. And now every time I listen to it, I just feel a little bit insane. But it's called Two Men in Love by the Irrepressibles. And if you want to hurt, that's a good song to listen to. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm still talking. I have no one to talk to about this series because none of my friends have read it and none of them will read it. And so if you are a part of that fandom and you would like to chat, I would love to talk to you. Like, SOS, please talk to me about this. And if you have critiques, I mean, you could put that down there too, but I really don't care because I'm an adult and I can think whatever I want. Thank you for listening to whatever the fuck this was. I hope you're having a great day, and maybe I'll see you again soon.